Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
And Al, this is why we wanted, this is what I wanted to do with this podcast, is tell stories of my friends and people that I knew, because you think you know a person, and you guys have had the luxury of having millions of people that know you. And I remember, I'll transition back, but the first time that we met in person was on the Duck Commander cruise, and I'll never forget that impression in my mind of just people just wanting to touch you and your family, and just wanting to be around your family. And man, there was probably 3,000 people on that boat. And I'll never forget just people just connecting with you and your family in that story. You know, when you were going through your time and your dad said, "Hey son, you got to change," and things like that. In your mind, looking now where you are today and seeing what your family has gone through, would that even have been possible in 20-year-old Al Robertson's mind?
No. I mean, that's the thing about it, Brian, that's for anybody. It's, periods of time or seasons, that's why our first book, Lisa and I wrote, was called A New Season. And when you're in a season of whatever, and in my case, it may have been, a sinful life, just in that season, you can't see out of that. It's so crazy because you're almost walled in. Lisa had the same experience at 15 years into our marriage. She had an affair, and it just, obviously destroyed us. But, she was in that season. It made no sense. I mean, that's why the guy I've been talking to in Alabama was like, look, because he's trying to make sense of it. He's been in discovery mode. He goes back and he looks at a credit card bill and he's like, how could she do this? I was like, look, you'll never make sense out of a season of life where the evil one is your compass. I mean, because you have no guide. You have no way out to see that. And so, and a lot of times it's just immaturity. It's not necessarily even sinful stuff. It's just a place, that you're at. So I always say, if you can get that North Star, if you can get focused on something that allows your direction to take you to something better, then clarity is what's going to follow next. And it happened with my dad, it happened with me, and it happened with Lisa. And so I think it's hard when you're young and sometimes going through something, you're thinking, man, there's no way I'm going to get past this. And you say, no, you will. You don't get over some things, but you can get past everything and allow God to heal you from that perspective. So, I like to go back and, that's one of the things our therapist did with us. We had a great Christian counselor. And so we were trying to figure out, well, how do we get in such a mess? I work for the church, we seemed like we had everything together, but it was such a mess. And so she had a great process of taking us back and looking at things that shaped our lives. But instead of going back alone, we went back with Christ with us. So she helped us through these visualizations, like look around the room, in this moment that was so defining of who you are now and all these bad things have happened. Can you see Christ there? And so, it sounds kind of crazy, but it really helped me to say, wait a minute, I'm going back in those moments. I'm taking Jesus with me, and we're clearing some of that out, and I'm finally giving it to him. So I had some of those moments. Lisa had some of those moments. It was amazing. I mean, 21 years later, our marriage is amazing, but she was a guide.
You guys are incredible.
She was a guide. She helped us. So I also always tell people they're going through situations and problems, I'm like, look, you need a guide. If you want to go and you want God to be with you, find you a guide. I mean, it may be a Christian counselor, it may be a pastor, it may be just somebody else that's been there, but you need a guide to help you to kind of come out of the weeds.
When you guys were going through that time in your life, because I don't know who this podcast is going to reach. It may be reaching somebody that's going through that very thing right now. Your girls were younger. You talk a lot about in the book, In Desperate Forgiveness, about living apart from Lisa and things like that. Are you amazed that there was no permanent fallout per se for your girls from what you guys went through? Because my mom and dad went through, and I'll be perfectly honest, my mom and dad went through a similar situation, and I can still go back to 10-year-old me being in my Little League uniform, bawling my eyes out in the bathroom. I can still see that picture in my mind 38 years later. And so are you surprised there wasn't any permanent fallout or damage to your girls through that?
Well, part of it is just healing that happens for a whole family, but there are some things that we see in our adult daughters that are results of going through that. So in the sense of permanent fallout, I mean, they're healthy, in that
Right.
sense, but there's still some things that are there. Anna, my oldest daughter, is very loyal, and I mean, just whatever you need. She's been working at Duck Commander since she was 16 years old. If I need something, she's right there. But she's always, we know she's got like a nervousness about her, about her mom. Like, she's got to be close. So why literally they live, 200 feet from where I'm sitting here. But that's a result of that. That was such a hard thing for her, the imagining of Lisa not being there because we were apart. And so she was, I don't know, around 12 years old or so at the time. So it was a really, like you said, that moment. So that's the way it affected her. And so there's always this little bit of insecurity about that. She's always checking on her mom, where are you going? Yeah. So we and Lisa and I just kind of grin at each other because we know what it is. That's since she was a kid, she doesn't want to lose her mom. So we see that, that's, and Lisa and I both are mature enough to understand we don't feel bad about it because you can't go back. But at the same time, where that came from. So my youngest daughter, she responded the other way. She was more angry because she and I are close. So her mom, they clash, and they're still that way. They clash. We could never live in the same place with her because, I mean, she and her mom be fighting all the time. But that anger came out of that same era because her deal was, at the time, she's like 10 years old. It was like, nobody's looking out for my dad. Like, because, Lisa was going through change, but she was worried about me. Nobody was looking out for me. So, it's funny, even those traits 21 years later, now they're both married, they got 3 kids each. We see it, and we realize where it came from. So, and we're open, we talk about it. I mean, it's not like we don't, but we're like, you're always going to have some things that shape you from your childhood, and good and bad. And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to repeat the same mistakes because you tend to want to, some of the things you learn, even the bad things, you'll go there to repeat those behaviors. And so I always say, we've done a lot of premarital counseling with couples, and I say, look, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to react the way you grew up, the way your mom did it, the way your dad did it, whatever, the way their marriage was, or you're going to try to run 100 miles the other way and want to be just the opposite, good or bad. So I was like, you got to find some place in there to be able to extract the good things that were in your raising that you can appreciate. So I always ask couples, I'm like, tell me one thing about your parents' marriage that you see that you don't want to be like that in your marriage. And that's a hard moment for you because I miss mom and dad, but everybody has at least one or more. They're like, well, I really wish my dad wouldn't berate my mom. I don't want to do that. I mean, he berates her. He does this, he does that. So I would say, what's one of the things you want that they do awesome that you want to make sure you do? And so then I always talk about that, trying to find that balancing act of building your own marriage. Because, if you think about it, people get married, they are a brand new family.
That's
so
right.
What it happens in that moment, it's a birth. And over time, it grows just like a child would, and it becomes its own entity as a marriage. And so you carry forward so much of your genetics and so much of the things you learn, but at the same time, you become, and I've noticed now it's interesting in my family because, I've been married 36 years this year. And so now, and then everybody else behind me, they're getting up in the 25, 28, 30-year marriages. And so, and we're our own patriarch of our own clans now. So mom and dad, we're blessed because they're still alive, but it's different. When we all get together, dad's still the patriarch, but now we have our own families to lead. And we, I have grandchildren, Willie has grandchildren, Jace will have before too long with Reed, when they finally decide to have children. And so you become your own, it's now its own path, and so it's really interesting over time how you see that happen. So you just want to be sure that you're grounded to lead, a large family or your, generations after you.
we had a situation in our church years ago, and I'll never forget it. My dad and I were together, and we were riding not far from where I am now. And I think we were coming back out here. And my dad looked at me and he said, I can help the man who was involved in that affair. He was the one committing the affair. He said, I can help him. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's not something that I really want to admit to my adult son, but I've been there. I was the man. My dad looked at me, and I'll never forget, it was powerful. My dad looked at me and said, I was the man. I was the one. I was the guilty party. And he said, I could have thrown away everything your mom and I had. You guys could have grown up in a broken home, because at that time it was just my sister and I. Right. I was 10 and she was 8. And so we could have been in that situation. And I'll never forget it, Al, because it was so powerful. It was a moment that my dad didn't want to have. But I think for him, it was a weight lifted off of his shoulder. Like, hey, listen, 2 things are going to come out of this. Number one, I'm going to free myself from something I probably should have told you a long time ago. And number 2 is, if I catch you doing the same thing, I'm going to kick your tail. That's right. And so that was the deterrent for me, was in my marriage to my wife, which we'll have 24 years coming up in October. That was the deterrent for me. And even to this day, my dad's been gone 7 years, a little over 7 years. That's the deterrent for me, was I didn't want to let number one, I didn't want my son to grow up in a broken home. Number 2, I didn't want to disappoint my family. And number 3, when you're in ministry, like I've been in ministry and things like that, you're right. What you were going through was, oh man, how can somebody in ministry go through that? When you talk to people today and you share your story with them, do you get those reactions of, I can't believe that happened to you, or, man, I know somebody that's probably going through that? What type of reaction do you see on the faces of people, or after you and Lisa get done speaking and telling your story, that you hear?
Usually they're surprised because, people had this, again, they kind of, if you're on television especially, and, obviously our family, people like our family that are fans of the show.
Yep.
And so they just think you don't struggle like they struggle. And I don't know why people think that. They elevate you, too much. And so I think people are surprised, first of all. But then the word that we keep hearing, of course, there's a lot of elements to our story. Lisa had an abortion during the period of time we were apart when I was in New Orleans. And so, we talk about that and how that impacted her, how that shaped her into our marriage. And so there's obviously a lot of facets and elements of our story that are pretty shocking. But the word we always hear is, oh, it's so courageous that you would tell this, that so they're surprised, but at the same time, it kind of provides an opportunity to say, like you said, oh man, I wish my cousin had been here. I wish my brother-in-law and his wife could have, it was just always somebody, if it's not them directly, it's like, and I'm always like, well, look, get them this book, because the reason we wrote it is because it's a ministry book. And so that's why we did it. We did it so that somebody could get one and read it, hopefully be impacted by it, but then pass it on to somebody else. I'm not interested in book sales. I'm interested in the story impacting people. It's like the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible's the bestseller every year since it was printed. But, nobody's really worried about the Bible in terms of a moneymaker. It's a life changer,
Exactly.
And that's kind of the reason we wrote our books,
How important was encouragement to you when you were walking through that season? Because obviously you didn't know what you know now. You didn't know, hey, is this thing going to get fixed? Is it going to be together? You didn't know how long you and Lisa were going to be apart. You had a lot of questions. How important was encouragement to you at that point in your life?
It's so important. And, an encourager, a person who has that ability, especially a gift, you remember Barnabas was the son of encouragement. It's a gift that people have. And, in my life at that period of time when Lisa and I were falling apart, John Godwin, who's, one of my best friends and on the show.
Yeah.
And, John's quiet and, he talked like this, and ham sandwich and all that. And on the show, he's kind of a character.
Only guy I've ever seen wear Crocs to church.
Exactly.
I went to church with you guys one time, and I said, "Man, Godwin's got Crocs on it."
Oh, he wears Crocs everywhere. What he wore on the show, that Columbia fishing shirt, the Under Armour shorts, and the Crocs, that's his uniform. He wears it everywhere. So when we go and travel, because we travel with him, Paul, a lot. We like to snorkel and go to the Caribbean. And so we go, of course, we get recognized everywhere, but it's because of Godwin. I mean, I can fly kind of under the radar, but Godwin is like a magnet because he looked like he just walked off of the set of that. But anyway, so John is sort of quiet. He's not, he won't talk your ears off, but he was my encourager. I mean, he was the one that just let me vet. Just, sometimes, some days I was having a bad day and thinking about stuff, and I was just kind of railing, against Lisa. And others days, I was in a better place, and I was thinking, maybe there's hope. And so John was that guy that, had that ability to just be there. And so I always tell people when they're going through something like that or some difficulty is that, sometimes just the ministry of presence as an encourager is a huge ministry. I mean, like, it's so needed in that moment. Sometimes we speakers, guys like you and me who are used to talking, we want to just give them verses, do this, do that. But sometimes you don't need all that. Sometimes somebody just needs somebody to walk alongside them, to listen, and to let them talk it out. And so, you ever got to have all those people in your life. And so I try to be both, to people. I mean, depending on what their needs are. And sometimes you just have to be quiet and be still and walk alongside them. I remember going to Haiti a few years ago after the big earthquake down there, and we were in there pretty quick because we have a relief agency here, One Kingdom, that's part of our church. And so Mike and I and another guy went into Haiti, and this church, we were going to speak there that morning with the earthquake part of it had collapsed. And of course, down there, if you got a meeting place, they use it for everything. So there was a nursing school that met there during the week. Well, there were like 45 nursing students that were killed in that building. And so here we are in that first Sunday they were together, and part of the thing is still like destroyed, but they're meeting in another place. And it was heavy. I mean, the feeling you could tell, there was death in the air. People had just died there a week earlier. And so I just felt overwhelmed. And so we walked in, and so the pastor came up to us and thanked us so much for coming. And, we were obviously trying to assess damage and figure out how we could help them. And he said, "You guys, by just showing up, you came here, you're from America, just by being here, without saying a word, you brought encouragement to my church and to this community." And it really impacted me because I realized that we never said a word yet. And yet they were encouraged because we showed up, in a dark hour for them. So I've never forgotten that, the idea of the ministry of presence and encouragement and what it means to people. So sometimes it's just walking alongside. Last night, one of our best friends from high school, her son, his teenage son, she got married later. And so he's like 16 years old. He's having a lot of colon problems. He's got surgery scheduled right now. And so Lisa, is so great about it. She was like, we need to call him and pray with him because we've been praying for him and kind of following on Facebook because they don't live here anymore. And so, there we are praying with, our friend and her 16-year-old son last night, 10 o'clock for this surgery today. And so, again, it's just, and she said, just y'all call them. Because, they follow us and they watch the live stream and all that. And they're just like, just the call, just that you call. Before we ever said a word, it encourages people. So those are the little things that you do to impact people.
And Al, it's funny you mention that because now there are so many more ways that we can encourage people. You can FaceTime, we can Zoom like we're doing here. Yeah. I got the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to speak to a group of people in Australia and New Zealand about encouragement.
Yeah.
And so now there are more ways now more than ever. As you and Lisa are in this new season of your life right now, you guys have the Unashamed podcast that you're doing. You're dropping 3 podcasts a week. You're talking more now than you've ever talked in your life, man.
And I'm the hardest working unemployed man in America.
and the unofficial title of Beard Wrangler because you do the podcast with your dad and your brother Jace. And occasionally you'll have guest appearances from the other brothers and Cy and people like that. But in this new season of your life, what's your why behind what you're doing now?
I think the why for me is you sort of realize you had, I hate to use the word career, but I mean, it's the word. So I sort of had this career of ministry and helping people. But I was being paid to do it, but that wasn't really the driving force. But,
Right.
it's survival while you're doing it. And I'm at this season now because of the show and because of other things we've been able to do, that I'm able to do all the things I do and not be paid. And not that it's about money, but there's something that's changed that about inside me about that. And so like I've started preaching again at our church, and I'm loving it because it's different, it's different for me. And so I really feel like it's the purest sense of ministry since I've been doing it, and I've done it most of my life, that, it's really not necessarily tied to a job or career or anything else, but it's just able to do what you feel like you've been gifted to do. And so my why is simply now to impact people. And a few weeks ago, well, I guess it's been a couple of months ago now, we were having a lot of people come here, and a lot of people want to get baptized. And we don't mind. I mean, we have to kind of arrange it because, to come through the church or whatever. But so I gave my email address.
Yeah, just don't show up at their doorstep. Just don't show up at Lisa's house going,
we were having that conversation in kind of the typical Robertson way, because a guy had just been here from Alabama, and he literally just showed up at people's door. Yeah. And like I said, we've had shooting, drive-bys. We have a lot, you don't want to do that. We're very armed and dangerous,
That's right.
but we want to help people. So I gave out my email address. It was amazing because I did, you say a few 100,000 people, that, and that sounds, quick, but that's a lot of folks. And so I was just inundated with people with all sorts of requests and things. But, it took me about 2 months to work my way through my email box, but I got back to everybody eventually. And it was so much of it was just ministry. It was just like, I'm going through this. I'm not sure about that. Some of it we funnel to the podcast to discuss. We use a lot of listener questions that kind of fuel some of what we talk about. So some of it we discuss there. But a lot of it was just me, packing out on my computer and just trying to give them a little bit of an encouragement, the best I could with the means I had.
The one person in your family that owns a computer, right?
That's exactly right. Exactly. And knows how to use it. Barely. I mean, I have to say I'm not too far ahead, but I do have it. But it's so I think that's the why. I think it's for folks. You can go as far as you can go. You can't be everything for everybody, but you can be something for somebody. And so that's kind of I tend to kind of take it down.
And I love in the last couple of minutes we've got here, I love what you talked about there, because, it's so important. You took time to respond to everybody. And I think that's so important in today's day and age, because we can get so inundated with things, right? We can get so inundated with text messages and emails and things like that. But for you to take the time to respond to everybody that took time to email you, I think that is so great that you said, hey, I'm going to carve out this time to respond, because somebody needs to hear, somebody reached out to me. They want to hear from me. And I think that's awesome that you did that.
Well, again, I just committed myself to doing it, because once I put myself out there, and of course, a lot of it was just to arrange with people what we do, but at the same time, again, it's just another way to do ministry. Yeah. And like you said, it's really been interesting, because this whole coronavirus has now pivoted us into a different way, even to sort of do church, in the sense of we would do these live stream. And now I'm thinking like which my experience in doing our show and Dad's show as a TV producer has really helped in our discussions to we're basically producing a show every Sunday in terms of what we're putting out there for our church, and then other people to experience. So it is pretty amazing how, no matter what's going on in your culture and your surroundings, as long as you're, that God is that North Star, he's that guiding point, then you can pivot and adapt, And I've always said, Brian, I think this is a great sort of test run. I've always thought at some point, unless the Lord comes back before then, the church in our current culture is going to undergo a great persecution at some point. It's just there's too many forces lining up the other way. And I think we've discovered how we would do underground, together, even through this period. So I look at it as a little bit of a test run in case that happens. I'm not hoping it happens, obviously, but if it does, if we wind up like Red China, where people are in charge, and look, you've seen it, not to pivot into politics, but you've seen it in some governors. I mean, basically, if you want to know what communist living is like, do a pandemic.
Yeah.
Where you're sitting around, you're not working, you're waiting for a government check, and then people tell you what you can and can't do, and when you can go outside and rat out your neighbors and all that, So, look, if it happens, hey, we've learned how to be able to do it, still connect to people, still get the word of God out and the message, and they won't know where we are. We'll be in a bunker somewhere in West Virginia.
Well, yeah, it's exactly. Well, we had a bunker here in West Virginia at the Greenbrier till they
That's
declassified it.
That's right.
So
that's what I'm saying.
I want to ask you real quick too. What is your biggest piece of intentional encouragement for people out there? Because again, this pandemic, you were talking about it earlier when we got started. The biggest things we see now are fear. We see uncertainty. We see, okay, when are we going to get back to normal in air quotes? Well, nothing's ever going to be normal. You were talking about sporting events without fans. Who would have ever thought that we would play games without fans?
Right.
And it would be a made-for-television product. In these times of uncertainty, and you've been there, you talked about it so beautifully, and I appreciate you being so open and sharing. But what's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement to folks right now, Al?
I would say no matter what your circumstance is, no matter what your situation is, the biggest encouragement I can give you is if you're in a bad place, God can take you to a better place. And so some of it's just endurance. Some of it is what we're learning through the process, but it's a season. You're not going to be there forever. If you're in a great place, I mean, you're like, man, I could live this place the rest of my life because it's so good and awesome. It's a season as well. So you want to realize and say that I'm probably going to have some area of challenge that's going to happen. So my biggest encouragement would be you got to keep that even keel of being a child of God through any and every circumstance. Paul said in Philippians that I've learned to be content no matter what the situation is, no matter what the circumstance. I've learned that in Christ, that's where I have to be. And so whether I'm at the highest of highs or the lowest of lows, he still is who he is. So those of you in a bad place, I'm just going to encourage you, you won't stay there forever. God can see you through that. If you're on top of the world, there's going to be a stumble coming. It's going to be a challenge. Something's going to happen. You saw how quickly things changed in our culture. Just like that. Yeah. I mean, it became something different overnight. And yet the people of God, we go forward, and the gospel still goes out and people are still embracing them. In fact, probably we're going to have some of the greatest opportunities we've had in a long time in the next few months and years because of this pandemic. So be consistent and know that, you can find what you need in Christ.
Well, the internet is on and working here in West Virginia because, somebody went to the pole and turned it on. And so that's how we're able to broadcast church up here. But you're right, virtual church. I mean, people, who would have thought the elevation churches and the people like that of the world who'd been doing it for years were trendsetters, now that's everybody's doing it. But no, what a great piece of intentional encouragement. I am not giving you Al's email address because I don't want everybody to inundate him with email. But they can go on Twitter and find you at Beardless Bro.
They can. And our website is alandlisarobertson.com. We have weekly blogs on there. A lot of good stuff. And those are
great, man. Those are so good.
It's been great. My uncle's been helping us with that, Uncle Gordon.
Yep.
But it's been great. So, I mean, and again, we're still putting stuff out there. God's still opening some doors for that. We got some other books we're working on for the future. So, we'll just keep going until the Lord comes back.
And right over my shoulder here, you can see Al's dad's latest book, Phil Robertson, The Theft of America's Soul. Desperate Forgiveness is up there. Bud, you got a prominent place on the bookshelf, man. There
you go. Well, we got Jesus Politics is coming out in August, which is Dad's newest book, and it's really good as well. And I think it's going to, we're still waiting on the pandemic. It's supposed to release on August the 4th. So is the tentative date unless things change. I saw last night that Hannity's got a new book coming out the same day. So that ought to be interesting. If we wind up on Hannity, I guess we can do Jesus Politics versus whatever his book is. So.
Well, it'd be a version of Wipe Swap, except you guys would be swapping books,
There you go. That's right. Book swap. I like it.
That's exactly right. Al Robertson, man, I appreciate it. I value your friendship a great deal. I appreciate you, man. Thanks for carving out some time to be on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Absolutely, bud. You keep encouraging. You're doing a good job.
Thank you, bud.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. And until next time, remember, everyone, everywhere, at any time, and any place can be an intentional